And we're back in the Heritage Green Room today talking to Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
So let's talk a little bit about your new book, Unintimidated. I know you're starting your book tour now. What are some recurring themes that we should focus on? I know one of them certainly is protecting the American taxpayer.
Yeah, and that's really what we did. The story we told, people knew about the protest. They probably knew about the recall itself, but they may not know the how, the what, and the why. And really the why was simple. In the past in our state, the big government union bosses, the big government special interests really controlled not only state but local government. And instead, we tell the story of how we put the power really firmly back in the hands of the taxpayers.
You've had a lot of successful reforms. Can we see some of what you've done and what you've been able to do in the state of Wisconsin in that book?
Absolutely. In fact, we talk about over the last few years, because of our tough but prudent decisions, for example, we inherited a $3.6 billion budget deficit. Today, we have about a $760 million surplus. Because of that, we've been able to cut taxes $1.5 billion. In fact, this December, about a month from now, property tax bills will come down in our state, and they'll be the third year in a row that they've actually gone down, which is unprecedented. Our rainy day fund is the largest it's ever been. And on top of that, we've put in place reforms that not only save money, but they make our economy better, they help the private sector flourish, they've lowered the unemployment rate down from where it was a couple years ago. When I first ran it, about 9.2%. Just this week, it went down to 6.5%. So a tremendous turnaround there in education reform, entitlement reform, the list goes on and on. It's
been an interesting year, I think, in and outside the Beltway. We've all had our ups and downs. What was it like surviving the recall for you in Wisconsin?
Well, it was interesting because the protests themselves leading into the recall weren't just about political pressure. In many cases, for me, for my family, as I write about in the book, and even for fellow Republicans in the legislature, there were some real physical threats. And we had the point where we had death threats. I mentioned one that vividly was directed towards my wife in the book, but there were many others, or just obnoxious things. Like we had a state senator in the western part of our state whose wife was an emergency room nurse, who she would come home and find carpeted all over the driveway of their home were nails that were literally put up there to try and pop their tires. I mean, just unbelievable things, that, the threats, the angst. In the end, though, we ended up winning by a bigger margin, by a larger number of votes than we did the first time. And that, I think, as much as anything, was very affirming.
But something the Heritage Foundation has been very outspoken about, I know you have too, conservative alternatives to Obamacare. Yeah. What do people need to know in terms of health care, and specifically what the options are if you're looking outside of Obamacare?
Well, and that's, I think, really important. I was asked about this the other day, and cynically, some of the left said, well, what do you guys offer as an alternative? Well, there's a whole series of really exciting market-based alternatives. Heritage done a tremendous job. I spoke at a Heritage event a week ago and got a nice overview of that. And there are other similar ones like that by other conservative minds across the country. We need to have more leaders, particularly in Washington, articulating those ideas, talking about how we don't need a state or a federal exchange to do this. Instead, what we can do is empower changes in the tax code that would allow individuals, whether they want to buy it through their employer, when they want to buy it individually, whether they want to go to a health savings accounts, to have the same tax incentives. And that's what the Heritage Plan, one of its key premises, talks about. Let the market drive this. And some people will say cynically, well, why are you defending the current system? This plan, I'm certainly not defending the current system. I'm saying the current system's broke, but the answer is to make it worse off by having the government be the bureaucracy instead of the private sector be the bureaucracy. The better answer is to let the marketplace really thrive and not have all these things that are dampening that enthusiasm.
Absolutely. It's something conservatives have been asking for years now. What do conservatives have to do and focus on to win in the future?
Well, you know, a lot of people after last November's election somehow said Republicans need to moderate, that they need to move to the middle, they need to become more like Democrats. I don't buy that at all, and I think that's not just a gut feeling. Look across America today. One of the best stories untold by many in the Washington media is that in America there are now 30 states with Republican governors, nearly as many states with Republican legislative majorities. So how does that happen? Particularly in states like mine, or Iowa, or Ohio, Florida, New Mexico. Those are all battleground states historically that the president carried, yet they have Republican leaders in charge of their state government. Why? Because we've got optimistic, visionary approaches moving forward. We're talking about real reforms in ways that are relevant to real people. And then most importantly, we're showing that we have the courage to act on our convictions. That's what people want more in England. They don't want you to move to the middle. Those swing voters in our state, in our book, we talk about them, odd as it sounds, we call them Obama Walker voters. Because even today, about 1 out of every 10 voters in our state have voted for me and still voted for Barack Obama, which politically makes no sense.
Right.
But the reason was in the last presidential election, as much as a good man would have been a good president, Mitt Romney did not make a compelling case to the American people, certainly not in my state, about how he was a reform-minded leader who would apply those reforms in a way that would help everyone in America.